NDSM Wharf. It's the Dutch dock and shipbuilding company, the former dock and shipbuilding company. But it's nice to tell a bit about the history. In the early 80s, all these buildings along the River Ij, this is the big sea arm, the River Ij. There were a lot of old custom sheds, warehouses that were empty because the industry left in the 80s. And they were all sort of no-go areas, buildings. It was like this raw space of emptiness and empty buildings and a lot of nomads and illegal people, but also artists moved into these buildings in the 80s and squatted these buildings or asked for permission to use these buildings. And there are about 12 big buildings in use by, we call them end use, by people, ordinary people or young people from the streets. They built their skate park there and artists, working space, galleries, restaurants, and all these facilities. So these places along the river became really famous and interesting. But in the 90s, suddenly, obviously, the banks and the developers and the city government wanted to create this river bank area into like a Wall Street or Manhattan along the river. But the companies didn't, the end users didn't really feel comfortable at this site, so they moved to the Zuidas, and this is now a very prestigious building project. While they were putting this consortium together, this sort of like this big, developing company called the Amsterdam Waterfront Finance Group, we, in those squatted buildings, decided, hey, this is interesting, we would like to participate in this city development because we have a lot of experience in how to transform these buildings into great new use or new purposes. So we offered to participate in this city development plan. But these developers and the banks were like, what, you are end users, you are not professional developers, you cannot do it. So we started this think tank and we invited housing corporations, all the managers, all the directors. We also asked architects, but also a lot of artists and squatters. And we came together and started thinking about this alternative development strategy for cities. So we wrote this manifest called the Stud of Cusco. And the Stud of Cusco is translated in the city of a framework or a city of a hull, the hull of a ship, the basic framework of a building or a basic framework of a ship. This is really like basic structure, no fancy stuff. And the city as a framework, it allows people to participate in the development because they can finish these frameworks. They can invest with their own money. The end users can collectively buy a building, or they can gradually invest in the building. It doesn't have to be an instant development. It could be on a longer term development. And this is sort of like a method, a manifest that we launched, this alternative town planning strategy of how you can actually build a city by the people themselves. This framework is very solid and strong, but the use is always flexible. People change, the use changes. Old warehouses, storages, became artist space and became yuppie apartments. So this is the whole thing about... And this was quite new at that time, this manifest, and this manifest ended, and now it's time to experiment with this way of developing. But despite our efforts with this manifest, and also we wrote a book about the role of the end user in the development of old harbor buildings, not only in Amsterdam, but in Northwest Europe. There are a lot of interesting cities in Europe where end users have a very strong role in the development of harbor premises. So we wrote this book, The Turning Tide. And but despite this, we were kicked out of our buildings anyway. At that time, there was also the alderman of culture in Amsterdam invited Trevor Davis, a very known art pope, we call him, from Denmark, England, Denmark. They invited Trevor Davis to give a culture comment on the city of Amsterdam. His comment was like, Amsterdam is pricing itself out of the market. Amsterdam is becoming a museum city. It's focusing a lot on consuming art, but not on the production of art. The whole image of Amsterdam being tolerant and, extravagant or free or contra images, this is going away. The city is not doing anything with their subculture. It's kicking the people out. and it's becoming so expensive. We started protesting, we put up signs everywhere at the airports, warning, do not travel to Amsterdam, it's becoming a bored city. And so this, and obviously also a lot of press, we got a lot of attention, and so this was sort of like a change in 1998, 1999, like 10, 11 years ago. And with this, with this protest and Trevor Davis, his comment on the city, and and the gentrification going on, the city of Amsterdam decided to set up a fund for breeding places, a fund to take buildings out of the market and give them to a collective of artists. Or maybe if the building or a building that artists like is too expensive, give them a little bit of money to make up for the rents, the high rents. But then suddenly in the national papers there was this big advertisement that the city, the local, we have the district authority. Amsterdam is divided in all district authorities, and then there's one center government in the center, and then there's all these district authorities. And here in Amsterdam North they own these premises. It was fallen apart, and they put an ad in the paper looking for a cultural entrepreneur. I thought it would be nice with this book and this manifest and all the great efforts and all the acknowledgement we got internationally that it was now time to really talk with the government and say, we're not going to squat this, we want to do it legally. And we're going to make a plan of how the people are going to build their own city in this warehouse. We're going to create this interesting investment climate here for people with poor people or artists or people on social welfare that have ideas, have people create this sort of experimental zone where people can build up their own ideas and their own city. And this was based on the City as a Framework manifest and the book, The Turning Tide. And with this book I entered the competition and said I was going to build a city with 500 artists here. And it was sort of like, I'm going to try it, I'm going to make a lot of publicity about it, I'm going to make a book. I got people to, I went to bars, to family, grandparents. I just got 10 euros or 10 guilders at that time. Asked people, do you want to donate some money in your project? Just really starting from nothing, getting some money that we could make a beautiful plan. And it was sort of like a joke. We thought, we from the squatting movement, they will never, and we had to compete with really commercial parties. But to our surprise, we won this competition. And what did we win? We won a ruin. A ruin, this building with no roof, no infrastructure, no toilets, nothing, and a lack of maintenance of 8 million euros. And it's like all ours. And we had no money. We were poor theater makers, some of us on social welfare. And this was like our prize. And we were allowed as the only party to make a feasibility plan. So I applied for a subsidy at the breeding funds, the funds for breeding places that had just started. I applied for subsidy there, and with that we made a feasibility plan. I could hire the architect, and I could hire the organizing genius to help us. How do you set these things up? And we made a feasibility plan, and our conclusion was it's not feasible because it's for 5 years. And the whole plan which we entered, with the programming and our building projects, it was not even possible, within the legislation. It would take us at least 5 years to get our first building pole in the ground because of the laws and legislations. But they did really like this plan, so they gave us another 10 and eventually 25-year lease contract that we rent it to develop this warehouse. And then we started. Well, not started, because then we thought, okay, we now had the competition, the feasibility plan, and we had all these ideas, and we got 10 million euros we managed to sort of lobby for, because we won prizes with our ideas, and we got money from the government to restore their building, not our building, but their building. So we got money from the one government to the other government. And then, to their shock, I threw all the plans in the waste bin and said, okay, now that we saw that everybody is now looking at the same way, we want to develop a city by the people themselves. Let's throw all the plans away and first get the people in. So within this ruin, I got the people in first. And this was quite strange, it was a ruin, it was dangerous, not allowed, but strong, good, artistic people. We all put a little line on the floor, a chalk line on the floor, and says, okay, this is my space, I'm going to pay rent for this. And this is how we started this process within this building. And we invited, for example, a philosopher and an architect. And we sat down to start our building workshop because we wanted to design the city ourselves too. And with the youth people, we had the skate park. We were already started, with skate park and little buses and trams. And then we just starting doing our stuff. But then we started designing because, we were really going to build a city in here. So with a philosopher and an architect, we also traveled. We went to musea. We got inspired by Constant Nieuwenhuis, the new Babylon, the organized chaos. And Louis Leroy, he's a guy who still lives in the north of the Netherlands. He designs beautiful gardens with rubbish, with polluted ground, with waste materials. So these were our two inspirational sort of people, and with that we designed our city in the warehouse there. And when we designed our city, we looked at this is the glass and this is the steel and this is the Broadway and this should be our Times Square and all this, really a city. Also we invited a city planner from the government, and this is really interesting how to work on the same level and starting designing your own city. And when we finished our design, we hired an architect to translate our plan into a building permission, to apply for building permission. In the meantime, this building, which the district authority wanted to get rid of in 5 years, had become a monument because it's one of the last two wharfs in the Netherlands that remind us of the very strong shipbuilding history of the Netherlands, very famous, renowned, very important part of our history. So this is now a monument, so it's protected. And this is great because when we started building inside, we always thought we should honor this building and build a city within, don't touch the basic structure because it's such sacred building. It's such a strong building. So this is also a monument, and because it will now stay for another 100 years, we invented an energy system which we won also prizes for, that it should be a sustainable energy system infrastructure in it as well. So we have two wells in the ground. We get the water from the river and we pump the water, we heat the water and we pump it through the whole warehouse. It's quite genius system we have. And we just got a building permission for the windmill in the crane. So we're going to have a little windmill which gives us enough electricity to get the heat pump starting and pump the water through our studios. Maintaining the building after it's developed, that is another story. And this is something I maybe neglected a little bit, and now I'm very interested in once you've done this, how are you going to get organized? How are you going to maintain this? How are you going to do the decision making? And that's even in the real world also very apart. The development and eventually the use. It's two separate worlds, and I'm trying now to sort of get these worlds together. Our concept is, naturally, organically growing of a city. We are so pure to the origins of architecture and to the whole concept of building. I was always sort of against organizations. Like once you get organized, you get into fights, you get into struggle, you get into power mixtures. I didn't want to have this. I was like, try and organize as less as possible. Things can organize themselves quite well, and this is sort of the way that I want to experiment with. And it does, it can organize itself in a way. I do think it works wonderfully to get a group together with all these different disciplines. We don't really see ourselves as part of the creative industry because creative industry is for us a not sustainable way of developing a city. It's creating a gap, a bigger gap, a wider gap socio-economically. So we don't see us, but we do see that they use us, that they need us, they feed themselves with us or with artists or young experimental people or with innovative ideas. Why not use this method for other disciplines? It's a method that could apply to all sorts of people. And I think this is a new way of developing. There has to be a new way of city planning, of city development. And I think working with ideas and the money of people instead of developers or in between organizations, I think this is interesting now to look on. And we are a great example of how you can develop a city really bottom up with private people, private money. You can see it becomes more beautiful. In the beginning you have not much money, you start with something simple, and after a few years you put a little paint, and you see how it sort of gradually evolves. And people feel that they are not allowed to build their own city. That it's difficult. But I think this is now a new starting. This project is used as a great example, as a starting point for the new development and building up cities everywhere.